Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles.
Hey, good morning, guys. I am so glad that you tuned back in this week. Last week I told you that the book of Numbers was a book that could go from being really boring to really interesting, all in the same chapter. So this week, we need to back up just a little bit because I left one of the stories out. But the reason I did that is because a lot of the really interesting stories in the book of Numbers happen in the second half. You remember last week that Korah rebelled against Moses and his leadership. And he and 250 of his followers were swallowed up by the earth when it suddenly opened right underneath of them. Their tents, everything they owned went down into the earth, and then the earth closed back over them. Well, just before that happened, God had instructed Moses to do this.
Whenever trouble comes to the Israelites, they grumbled and complained. Moses prayed. They complained. Sometimes the people turned against Moses and Aaron. They complained about what the Lord was doing through them. Sometimes they complained about Moses and Aaron being their leaders. Some of them wanted to be the leaders instead of Moses and Aaron. A group of rebels had stirred up many of the people against Moses and Aaron. Part of the rebellion was against Aaron's authority as the chief priest. So God arranged a test. The leader of each of the 12 tribes, including Aaron, brought his wooden rod of authority to Moses. Each rod had the name of the owner on it. The rods were put in front of the ark in the tabernacle. The Lord said, "Buds will grow on Aaron's rod to show that I have chosen him." So the 12 rods were placed in front of the ark. The next day Moses brought the rods out for the leaders to see. Aaron's rod had buds and blossoms. It even had ripe almonds growing on it. The leaders could hardly believe what they saw. It was truly a miracle. Then the Lord told Moses to keep Aaron's rod beside the ark. When people complained about Aaron's authority, he would bring out the rod and show it to them. This should have stopped the grumbling and complaining, but it didn't. "If we go near the tabernacle, we will die," the people still complained.
Israel is in chaos. Both the Levites and the 12 tribes have rebelled, resulting in 250 dead in front of the tabernacle and 14,700 dead in the camp. The people are beginning to feel the reality of what it means to live near the one true holy God as sinners. Listen to their collective cry recorded in chapter 17 verse 13. "Everyone who comes near the tabernacle of the Lord shall die." Are we all to perish? In order for God to continue to live among his people, there would need to be a buffer between the people with their sin and God with his holiness. This is what the priests were for. God publicly confirms Aaron, his sons, and his tribe of Levites as the one group of representatives he had chosen to work around and in the tabernacle of his presence. He does this by miraculously causing Aaron's staff to sprout flowers, while the staffs of the other 12 tribe leaders remained lifeless. God is reaffirming his commitment to the Levites, which would be sorely needed after so much rebellion and death. Something else that will be needed after all this death is a way to clean up the camp from all the dead bodies. But they can't touch the dead bodies without becoming unclean. So God provides a solution. A red cow was taken outside the city and sacrificed as a sin offering. The ashes from this heifer were mixed with water to create a cleansing solution. This mixture could be sprinkled on people and their houses to purify them after coming in contact with death.
Well, the next chapter is chapter 18 in the book of Numbers, and God spends quite a good deal of time explaining how offerings are supposed to be brought and what the priest portion of that was. That means when people brought their offering, the priest got paid out of their offerings, just like we do today. Our offerings go to cover other things like the light bill. Somebody's got to pay for the heat and the water. How about those yummy donuts we have on Sunday morning, huh? Yeah, all that stuff comes out of the offering plate. Not only that, we feed all kinds of homeless people, and we support all kinds of missionaries all over the world with the offerings that people bring before the Lord. You guys remember when the people got to the base of Mount Sinai, how they were hungry and they were thirsty, and God made water come out of the rock? And God had instructed Moses to go and hit the rock. And when he did, water gushed up out of it. Well, this week it happens again. The people are going through the desert and they're grumbling and they're complaining against Moses. And so Moses goes before the Lord, and this time the Lord tells him to do something interesting. He says, Moses, this time I want you to take your staff, but instead of hitting the rock, I want you to speak to the rock. Check out this video that explains all about that.
So here they were again, without water. Instead of trusting God to care for their needs, they grumbled and complained. And Moses, as he always did, turned to God for help. God told Moses to take his staff, his walking stick, and call his brother Aaron. They were to gather all the people together. Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water, God said. Moses had been patient for a long time. But after 40 years of listening to the Israelites grumble, he had heard enough. He was angry. He was tired of their grumbling and complaining. Once more, they were showing that they did not trust God. Moses was so irritated that he forgot it was God who had caused all the miracles to happen. God had caused water to flow out of the rock 40 years before. Only God could cause it to flow again. But Moses forgot. He felt he was the one who could make the water come from the rock. Listen, you rebels. Must we bring you water out of this rock? Moses yelled at the people. But he didn't speak to the rock as God has commanded. He raised his arm and hit the rock twice with his staff, and God made the water gush out. Moses may have felt quite pleased with himself for a moment. He'd probably wanted to yell at the people for a long time, and it may have felt good to hit that rock. But Moses had given the impression that the power to make the water flow had come from him and Aaron. So God was dishonored. If Moses had obeyed, it would have reminded the people that although Moses was their leader, he got all his instructions from God. Then God spoke again in his calm, gentle voice. Moses, you did not trust me, not even to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites. God said, because of that, you will not bring this community in the land that I give them. Immediately Moses realized what he had done. He too had forgotten to trust God. He had forgotten for a moment who was really leading Israel. For 40 years, Moses and Aaron had struggled in the wilderness. For 40 years, they had led God's people. But Moses and Aaron could not go into the promised land. The Israelites had to learn that whoever their leader was, that person had to trust God completely and honor all of God's instructions. God wants us to honor and worship Him. He wants us to trust Him. He wants us to know that He will be with us every day. We worship Him when we do what He asks of us, and we worship Him when we trust His leading.
You remember Jacob had 12 sons? Well, Jacob also had a brother named Esau. His descendants were known as the people from the land of Edom. Now you would think, being brothers, that they would be friendly, but oh no, they weren't friendly at all. As a matter of fact, they were so unfriendly to their brothers the sons of Jacob, that when it came time for them to pass by, Moses sent word to the king of Edom. And he said, hey, we need to get by you. Look, we're just going to walk straight through. We're not going to turn to the right-hand side. We're not going to turn to the left. We're not going to touch anything that's yours, but please give us permission to pass straight through. Well, the king of Edom, he didn't believe Moses. He believed that the people would come through and they would eat up all their supplies and drink up all their water. And so he said, no, you can't come through here. Now, the next thing that happens in our story is that Aaron dies in the wilderness, just like God had promised from our video earlier. Well, the one that took Aaron's place was his son, Eleazar, and Eleazar becomes the high priest. Now, back in old times, it wasn't like it is today, where we wait 3 days, we have a funeral, and then we're sad, but everybody moves on. Oh no. Back then, the funeral lasted for 30 days. And so the whole camp waited for a month while they mourned the death of Aaron. Chapter 21 is where we find that God gives the Israelite people victory in battle over the Canaanite people. And that's a pretty interesting story.
The Israelites did not trust God to lead them into the promised land, so God punished them and made them wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Along the way, the Israelites grumbled and complained. When they set up camp, they complained that they did not have water to drink. "Why did you bring us here?" they asked. "We will die here, and so will our animals." God told Moses and Aaron to stand in front of all of the people and speak to a rock. God said water would come out of the rock. Moses called the people together, but instead of talking to the rock, Moses hit the rock 2 times with his staff. The water came out, and the people and the animals drank. But God was angry that Moses and Aaron did not obey his instructions or believe his power. So God said Moses and Aaron would not lead the Israelites into the promised land. The Israelites continued through the wilderness. Moses sent messengers to ask the king of Edom if the Israelites could travel through his land. But the king of Edom replied, "No, I won't let you go through our country, and if you try, we will attack you." So the Israelites had to travel around Edom. The journey was long, and the people continued to grumble and complain. "Why have you led us from Egypt to die in the wilderness?" they asked again. "We have no bread or water." God disciplined his people by sending venomous snakes that bit the Israelites, and many of the people died. Some of the people realized they had sinned by complaining to God, so they told Moses, "Please ask God to take the snakes away." Moses spoke to God for the people. God told Moses, "Make a snake image and put it on a pole. When anyone who is bitten looks at it, he will recover." Moses made a bronze snake and mounted it on a pole. Whenever someone was bitten, that person looked at the bronze snake and recovered. The Israelites faced a huge problem because of their sin. God sent snakes to punish Israel, but anyone who was bitten could look at the bronze snake on the pole and live. Because of our sin, we face a huge problem. We are separated from God. We deserve to die. But anyone who looks to Jesus on the cross and trusts in him will live forever with God.
Wow, that one was pretty cool, right? Yeah, I enjoyed that story too. But the next one is probably almost everybody's favorite story from the book of Numbers, because we're all familiar with the story of the talking donkey in the Bible. But if I ask you, who was riding that donkey? Where was he going? Why was he going? What did he do when he got there? These are all very important questions.
The Israelites wandered the desert for 40 years. Finally, they came to the edge of the promised land. By now, all of the old men had died except for Moses, Joshua, and Caleb. Balak, the king of Moab, saw the Israelites and was afraid they would take over. King Balak sent messengers to a wise man named Balaam. The king said, "Come and curse them, so that I might be able to defeat them." King Balak knew that whomever Balaam cursed became cursed, and whomever he blessed became blessed. God told Balaam not to go with these men and not to curse the Israelites because they were blessed. Balaam obeyed. The king pleaded with Balaam a second time. "Please, come curse these people." This time, God told Balaam, "Go with the men, but only do what I tell you." So Balaam saddled his donkey and left with the king's men. Then God sent an angel to stop Balaam. Balaam could not see the angel, but his donkey could. First, the donkey went off the road, then ran into a wall. Finally, she laid down on the ground. Balaam hit the donkey when it stopped, so God gave the donkey the ability to speak. "What have I done to you that you have beaten me 3 times, the donkey said. Balaam was so mad that he didn't even wonder why his donkey was talking. "You made me look like a fool," Balaam said. "I should kill you." God allowed Balaam to see the angel. And Balaam said, "I have sinned. I will go back." The angel said, "No, go with these men, but only say what I tell you to say." When Balaam met the king, he said, "I can only say what God tells me." The king took Balaam to see where the Israelites were camping. Balaam told King Balak that he could not curse someone who God had blessed. Then Balaam blessed the Israelites. The king was not happy. He took Balaam to the second place to look out over the Israelites. God told Balaam to bless the Israelites again. Balaam even told the king the Israelites would defeat him. "If you won't curse them, don't say anything," the king said. A third time, he took Balaam to a place overlooking the Israelites. God gave Balaam a third message, and again, Balaam blessed the Israelites. King Balak had heard enough. "I brought you here to curse the Israelites, but you have blessed them," he said. "Go home." Balaam had a final message for the king. He said, "One day, the Lord will be born to the people of Israel. I see him, but not now. I perceive him, but not near."
All right, I enjoyed that story. Next, we move on to chapter 26, where God instructs Moses to count all the people again. And so that goes on for a while, and that's one of those stories that would... But then we reach chapter 27, and this one's pretty interesting. The daughters of Zelophehad, they come to Moses and they say, "Moses, our daddy died in the wilderness. And he wasn't one of the followers of Korah. He just died in the wilderness along with all the other people. But he didn't have any sons. All he had was us girls." And so Moses prayed to God. And God said, "The daughters of Zelophehad are right. Moses, when you go into the promised land, you are to give the daughters of Zelophehad their daddy's inheritance in the new land." Wasn't that nice of God to make sure that these girls were taken care of? Next, in chapter 27, God tells Moses, "Moses, you're getting pretty old, and pretty soon you're going to die. It's about time for you to appoint a new leader." And so Moses goes before the whole congregation, and he tells them that the next person that's going to be in charge to rule over the people of the land of Israel is Joshua. In chapters 28 and 29, we see God setting up exactly how he wanted the daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, and the special offerings brought before him. And we won't go much into that because I want to move on to chapter 30, where God talks about making vows. Now, vows are very special to God. And he says if you make a vow, he intends for you to keep it. And so, guys, when you say something like, I swear to God, you're actually making a vow. And God says, you'd be better off to never make a promise to me than to make one and break one. So, guys, think very carefully before you swear on anything. Well, it looks like a thunderstorm has come up, so you guys are just going to have to bear with me as we go through this. So if you hear it rumbling in the background, don't worry about it. We're just going to keep on moving. You remember that Jacob had 12 sons. Well, 2 of his sons were Reuben and Gad. And after the battle with Midian, where Balaam, the guy that had ridden the talking donkey, he dies in that battle. But after that battle is over, Reuben and Gad look at the land that's all around them and they say, man, this is really good land for raising sheep and cattle. My goodness, we'd like to live right here. And so they go to Moses and they say, Moses, do you think we could have this land on this side of the Jordan River for our inheritance? Well, Moses, he immediately thinks that these guys are saying they're not going to help the rest of their brothers and sisters defeat and clear out the land that's been promised to them. And so he says, are you guys crazy? We just got done traveling 40 years through the wilderness because of people's rebellion, and now we're right here on the edge of the promised land, and you guys want to rebel against God? Reuben and Gad say, oh no, Moses, no, that's not what we meant at all. Of course we'll go over and help our brothers and sisters defeat the enemy in the promised land, but then when that's over, we would like to come over and have this be our inheritance. And so Moses makes them promise that they're going to go and help their brothers and sisters, and then when they're done, they can come back and have the land of Midian. Now in chapter 33, we learn all about Israel's travels from the time they left Egypt. And the Bible lists one by one the names of all the places they went. And they began all the way down here, and they came across to the bitter waters, and then they went over to Mount Sinai. And then they traveled here, and they traveled there. And they traveled around here, and then over there, and then back here, and down here, and up here, and over here, and back over here, and then up and around this way, until finally, here they were on the edge of the Jordan River. Now, as the people were camped on the edge of the Jordan River, I want to read to you what God said to Moses just before they entered the Promised Land. So in Numbers chapter 33, beginning in verse 50, God says this. While they were camped near the Jordan River on the plains of Moab, opposite of Jericho, the Lord said to Moses, you must drive out all the people living there. You must destroy all their carved and molten images and demolish their pagan shrines. Take possession of the land and settle in it, because I have given it to you to occupy. You must distribute the land among the clans by sacred lot and in proportion to their size. A larger portion of the land will be allotted to each of the larger clans, and a smaller portion will be allotted to each of the smaller clans. The decision of the sacred lot is final. In this way, the portions of land will be divided among your ancestral tribes. But if you fail to drive out the people who live in the land, those who remain will be like splinters in your eyes and thorns in your side. They will harass you in the land where you live, and I will do to you what I had planned to do to them. And so this is what I meant earlier when I said sometimes God says you have to wipe out every last person from that clan. It doesn't mean God's being unfair. He's saying if you don't get rid of all of them, they are always going to be a problem for you. And you know what? We find out in later stories that the people did not follow God's command to get rid of all the people. And just like God had said, the people became like splinters in their eyes and thorns in their side. And they constantly harassed the people of Israel. Now, chapter 34 is kind of interesting because it tells us what the true boundaries of Israel are supposed to be. Had the people followed God's instructions, instead of having this much land, they would have had this much land. What a difference, huh? You see, God wants to bless us beyond our own imagination, but our disobedience limits us, just like it limited the people from the land of Israel, who didn't claim all of the promises God had given them. Next, I want to talk to you about cities of refuge. See, God provided a place for people to run to if they had killed somebody on accident, because God knew that the family of the dead person would chase down and kill the other person, whether it was an accident or not. And so he made a place for them to run to called a city of refuge. That'll be important in later stories in the Bible as we read them. The last chapter of Numbers covers a pretty cool topic, because men were kind of bullies back in the Old Testament times, and they didn't want to give the women their due inheritance. But in Numbers chapter 36, God gave special instructions to Moses on how inheritances of property were to be given to women. So next week, join me and the fabulous Bentley brothers to start learning about the book of Deuteronomy. Love you guys. See you next week.
It's a letter from God that sets everyone free, a gift for you, for me.